My name is Dave Landis. I'm leading a workshop today for legislative staff. It's my hope that when you see the whole thing, you'll be intrigued by the NCSL sufficiently that you might attend one of their workshops or do some follow-up reading or be able to talk to your colleagues and raise these as issues that you can compare your experience with theirs so that as a staff member, you can increase your ability to participate well and constructively in resolving legislative conflict.
This book had a significant role in my 28-year career at the Nebraska legislature. When I left, I'd passed 391 bills, and that's the most legislation in the history of the state of Nebraska. And I did it without being a particularly well-known senator. And the reason is, bills that are not particularly controversial don't get a lot of press. They also pass the legislature. If you want to know how you get a bill passed, get a public hearing filled with people who want the bill and there's nobody in opposition. So I did a different piece of business, and I did it because of this book, because after my second year out of those 28, I was a chairman. I had an issue that came up, and it was a stalemate. It was the city of Omaha who wanted to regulate the sanitary improvement districts at its perimeter through the planning department, and then of course those sanitary improvement district developers saying they didn't want to have regulation by the city of Omaha and their planning department, that while there were bad eggs, this would have been a huge amount of work for everybody who was in fact a good player. When I came back, I brought the parties back together and I said, what are your underlying concerns? I understand your position. Half of you are for the bill and half of you are against it. I get it. Yes and no. Now, what is it that the yeses are trying to achieve? What is it that the noes fear? What we discovered was that they were not actually antithetical in opposition. Here's a couple of things that they agreed on. They agreed that the 10% that were bad apples needed to be disciplined. What they differed on was whether that would be by the planning department governing all SIDs or whether it could be the district court of the 10% that were bad apples. And in fact, when we decided, here's what we'll do, instead of regulating everybody, we'll create triggers to identify the bad actors, and then we'll have a neutral third party, not an ongoing bureaucracy that will discipline it. They got on the same page and agreed. Now the room was filled with people who were yeses. Once they were together, they found 18 other things that when they went back through the law, they could improve to their mutual satisfaction. Reducing timelines, reducing costs, taking out unnecessary red tape, that both the bureaucrat and the regulated found beneficial. I was not familiar with the dynamic that wound up having the room move from yes and no, equally divided, to a room full of everybody saying, not only is that better than the legislation that we brought in before we began, but now we've invented a way where it's better than for both of us and in ways we did not expect. What they found was joint gain. Joint gain is not what most politics is about. We take the voting booth, we establish elected representatives who pass laws, and we base it on majority rules. That is where my side wins and your side loses. That's that dynamic. It's not concerned about joint gain so much as it is, my perspective is the accurate one, it reflects public interest, so I want what I want. Difficulty is it usually engenders a momentary sense of satisfaction and approval until you think of all the ways that you can attack even the winning process. So we have petitions to undo that. We have recalls of the parties that are there. We have a new slate of candidates to try to knock you out of office the next time. Or we hire Atticus Finch to go to court and make sure that we can possibly get this into the court system. And if not, you just go back to state capitol and do it again to the next year. You try to undo it. These are all ways that rob the gain of beating the other side of its long-term permanency. The essence of this deal-making occurs on occasion. It's not the norm, but it does occur inside caucuses, inside parties. It does occur between the majorities and minorities in the two houses. It does occur in the committees, and in fact, I find it more in the committees than any place else. There is exchange between the houses. In fact, you've got to have that with a conference committee that tries to do that. There's relationships with the governors from one or both houses, and then finally, there's a lot of relationships with the lobby. What is it, the essence? A trade. A negotiation is a trade. A deal is a trade. The trade might be, I will not filibuster. I'll still vote no, but I won't filibuster. The trade might be, you will get your day in court. The trade might be, here are the standards or the rules under which the debate will be done. As you do well, I do well. As you do better, I do better. As you do great, I do great. If you want to transform our relationship, you don't make it a tug of war. You make it shoulders-to-shoulder partnerships so that as it gets better for both of us simultaneously. We have a number of forms of exchange. And what happens is we have things that we are prepared to part with for things that we want. The deal doesn't work without it. Out of a 60-day session, we spent 58 days demonizing the other side. And the last 2 days, when the stress is huge and the time is very, very fleeting, we try to do a deal. We finally do a deal because we weren't able to compel the other side of what we wanted in the 58 days when we were calling them names in public. There are multiple kinds of interests. One of them is like that, and that's the one we're really familiar with. It's money, it's the buyer, it's the seller. As you do well, I do less well. What we want to do, if we want to find agreements, is particularly look at the second and third of these options to search for any kind of joint gain. And then we want a solution to this problem that's fair and reasonable and doesn't harm the relationship. So we want to be fair and reasonable in the tug of war. We want to maximize good trades, and we want to get as much shared interest as possible. And people who know about deal making know to look under all three rocks. What we're searching for is the zone of agreement. And what is the zone of agreement? The zone of agreement is what overlap exists between what the parties will accept. Now, sellers will be happy to sell at infinity, but they will go down to a bottom line. Buyers would be happy to accept it as a gift, but they will pay up to a certain amount. If these numbers don't overlap, we can't do a deal. The only thing that works is when they do overlap, we find someplace inside that zone that allows us to say yes. Has anybody tried to sell a house and after 6 months there's no takers at your asking price? Anybody rethought what their asking price would be? Why did they do that? Because timing, which came up back here, will alter our perspective about what our bottom line ought to be. And the longer it goes before we can make a deal, the bottom line goes down because we realize we have expectations that are not going to be satisfied. So, timing is related to this. These do move. We do go to the 58th day when the frustration level of both sides push these positions to a place that you can do an overlap and a deal in the middle. The best I think we can do is to nominate solutions that a third party would find legitimate. What you do not have any control over, and nobody does, is how other people will behave. That you do not have control over. And if you ask me for a magic wand, how do I touch the forehead of somebody on the other side and make them be different than who they are? I don't have it and you don't either. Nobody does. What can appeal to them, however, is significant because there are things that you can do that can drive them away, and there are things you can do that bring them closer, but there's nothing that you can do that can compel them to act in the way that you want to. The best I think you can do is incentivize that behavior. A third party would say you're being reasonable, thoughtful, and this is an appropriate and problem-solving result. And here's why I know that, because it has solved problems elsewhere, and you'd be framing this in knowledgeable, thoughtful, well-studied problem-solving arrangement. Maybe that would appeal to them, and maybe it won't. Zone of agreement, second big idea. Third big idea is there's a pattern to this, okay? And the pattern is we start with introductions of each other. We then go to information exchange, and this is usually rushed. Where deals get to be made, where thoughtful solutions arise, comes from expanding this step, the information exchange. And by the way, when we talked about showing the other side all your cards and then asking for theirs, that is a bad practice for an information exchange. So we have an information exchange, and then there will be an offer. And I've couched it in the way that everybody recognizes, which is money. Doesn't have to, but it is. It's not unlikely that there's a counteroffer. Expect counteroffers. What doesn't happen is, oh, that's your first offer, we're done. Even if you can live with it. You know why? Because most people don't open at their bottom line. The other side knows it, and they push them for a little more. Expect to have a counteroffer. 3 things that we've learned so far. First thing that we've learned is there are more than one kind of an arrangement between us. Conflicting, potentially complementary, and maybe shared. That's one idea. Secondly, there is no deal at all if we can't find a zone of agreement. If it doesn't exist, there is no deal. And the third thing that we've learned is there's a dance, and it's intro, info, offer, and by the way, I think you can expect the counter, and then you either get to yes or no. Having said that, there's one step that's not on there that should be there. We should spend some time before we ever sit down with the other side. So the important step that's left out is up here. And by the way, it's a place where staff can be very helpful. Staff can be very helpful in the preparation for the discussions to have this exchange. Another place where staff can really be helpful is here. The information exchange. They can raise the questions that need to be answered. They can ask for the legitimacy of the figures that are on the table. They don't get to make offers. I don't think we expect staff to offer or make counteroffers, although they might, I don't know. My own experience is I did this part of it myself, but let me tell you a place where the staff was hugely important to me, and that was here and here. Here's what I want us to take away. First, there are multiple kinds of interests, and we want to explore all 3, and we want to look under all 3 rocks. Secondly, we want to understand that there is a zone of agreement if there is a deal or not, and that we are exploring for the existence of a zone of agreement, and the zone of agreement might alter by time. And third, there is a pattern to this, and the overlooked part of the pattern is time spent in preparation and time spent in information exchange. Our position at the table depends on the alternatives we have away from the table. The more alternatives we have, the more attractive those alternatives are, the better the outcome at the table I'm going to need instead of doing that. Now, our alternatives away from the table affect our behavior at the table, and the better those alternatives are, the better the deal's going to have to be for me before I'll say yes. I find it's really hard to get a good idea under pressure. You know where our brain goes under pressure with short timelines? Cliches. Places where we've been before. The obvious. The one that's jumped out at us. The idea of something new, something different, something rare, something that you have to hunt for, usually contemplates time. And by the way, time to reflect, not just come up with this before tomorrow at 8 o'clock. I'm the Urban Development Department Director for the City of Lincoln. We had a fabulous local business, an insurance company, say, look, you spent $200 million to create a channel for a creek in your town and a linear park in a rundown area of town. You did that to create land out of the floodplain, and we will build a $55 million corporate headquarters right next to the park you've created, and the city will see that your investment made sense and that you have engendered a whole round of investment for the city. Would you like that? So he said, God, yes, we'd love it. They said, fine, because we had to spend a lot of money to get this land, and there's some rights of way and some streets that you have to vacate us. Give us that land for free. And we said, we don't give away land for free. They said, look, we're going to spend $55 million to make you look great and save your park and that $200 million investment. All you got to do is give us $1 million of land for free, and the reason is we spent a lot of money getting this land in play. Here's the deal ultimately. They had a garage over here. The garage was used at 7 in the morning to 6 at night, 5 days a week. We had a park that was in the middle of a neighborhood. We wanted ethnic food festivals. We wanted to have music. But to do that, we would have invited the community down and simply park all over the neighborhood and make that situation a nightmare for the neighborhood. What we got the party to agree was that they would open this garage on the weekends and charge to use it. Charge the regular garage fee that you'd use in the city. So it was an income stream to the insurance company, but it was 500 parking stalls next to a park for us that we didn't have to build and we could take away from the neighborhood. These are empty stalls on the weekend. Empty stalls on the weekend are very different. They don't have much value to the insurance company. They have huge value to the citizens who want to use the park. That's the dynamic. And when you don't contemplate, when you don't think, when you don't reflect and have a chance to think about it, you don't say to yourself, there's a form of value in this deal that we're not thinking about. We're thinking it's all about money. Wait a second. There are empty garage stalls on the weekend that they don't need, that we want. And for that, we would trade land. We got 15 years of 15 years of available parking in exchange for our rights of way and some vacated alleys. And we both did well. A position is a preferred solution. Every bill in the legislature is a preferred solution. Every bill in the legislature will probably allocate the how much function. Underneath that bill is the reason it was brought, a problem that deserved to be solved, the underlying motions of the parties, and therein lies the answer to the question why. I repeatedly, as chair, brought in parties into my office and asked them the why questions. And the reason is, the questions at the beginning, the how much questions, produce acceptable solutions, but the best solutions I found were the wise solutions that came when we could compare whys, because we could find ways that worked well. A conflicting interest is that kind of interest that is, that is, as it's good for you, it's bad for me. As it's good for me, it's bad for you. Complementary interests are those trades, and there were probably the trades, in this case, between the rind and the pulp. That's a very valuable commodity. When we get to those underlying interests, this is my law student who wanted to go to Florida for vacation because his wife had gotten the family to go to Colorado the last 3 years and he was bored. He wanted me to figure out what I could do to get him to Florida. He said, look, if we do it this way, we're going to haggle and we're going to cut the baby in half and we're going to go to Arkansas, and I don't want to do that either. Why do you want to go to Florida? I want to fish in the ocean and see good professional sports. Why does your wife like to go to Colorado? She likes to be up in the air, clean air, and she wants to ski. I said, then in that case, your interests are fishing in the ocean, good professional sports, and skiing on a mountain. Find a place in America where you can do that, and they went to the Seattle area. And by the way, Seattle is better than Colorado and Florida for both the wife and the husband. Colorado has an angry husband who feels ignored. Florida has a wife who's not particularly comfortable in those circumstances and feels dictated to a husband who said, we're going to go here because it's my turn that you be miserable because you've made me miserable the last 3 years. Seattle is something, by the way, that my law student's wife came back and said, I wish we could problem solve like this more often. And you stopped being a lawyer to argue me into where you want the family to do things and negotiate with me as to what my interests are. Seattle is better in part because you have a happy wife and a husband, and because you've modeled good decision making. There has to be a reason to do a deal. And generally speaking, it's this. The deal can do something for me that the present cannot necessarily do. I might be able to get this bill next session, but I can't get it this session unless I do a deal. I might be able to take nothing this year and get everything I want next year, or I can take half a loaf this year if I do a deal. Without that motivation, there is no reason for parties to agree. So if we want to engender an interest in the other side to making a deal, we have to be able to identify for them something that is in it for them, something that advances their interests, something they could get only by doing a deal with us that they couldn't get someplace else. It has to do with the alternatives we were talking about earlier. I have control, you have control of my fate, but I have control of your fate. And we can have mutually assured destruction, or we can have a deal. But we have to be able to show the other side that there's something in it for them. We had a deal problem about workers' comp about 20 years ago now. Premiums were going up, rocketing up at 15% a year, while the benefits were the 47th lowest in the country. We had a big knockdown governor's summit. I learned 4 big rules that people cared about. Change the doctor choice rule, go to managed care, index benefits so that they grow by the cost of living rather than legislative action, and safety committees. And business said yes to 2 of them and hated no 2 of them, and labor said yes to the opposite 2. This is the normal legislative package. And you look to try to beat the other side and cram it down their throat. And if you've got a one-sided legislature, you can expect that to be the agenda. However, if it's a close match, the chance you're going to get through this session with exactly the dynamic as it is today, because they can cancel each other out for progress, is pretty great. So the question that I asked the labor people were, what are your priorities? And I got the banking director to ask the same thing of business, and this is what business said. These are how important the issues were for them. And these were how important the issues were for labor. There's a deal there, and you need to be able to see it. You have to give up something, and what do both parties have to give up? They have to give up their 3rd and 4th priorities. They don't get their 3rd and 4th priorities. But what do they get? They get their top priorities this session passed through with a bill that passed 41-7, and the only non-voting members are their 7 practicing lawyers who didn't want to be part of this deal because they didn't think it was very good for lawyers. It was good for business, it was good for injured workers, it wasn't good for lawyers, and they voted no. What we discovered was that instead of the conflicting interest of I get everything, you get nothing, that there was a trade that was good across that bowed section of the complementary interest. Then we kept going, and we found out that getting your rights over the phone from the workers' comp court was preferable to both sides. Labor got the advice for free, and business got it so that the laborer got their advice from somebody other than a lawyer trying to sue the business and talk them into suing them. They got a neutral third party. That was good for both sides. They found out that if they ran the computer tapes, they could discover which businesses didn't have workers' comp. Labor wanted to know that because those businesses were in danger of leaving somebody without protection. And business wanted to know it because the legitimate businesses were paying for workers' comp, and they wanted to know which of their illegitimate competitors weren't paying so we could capture and get them and make them pay for workers' comp. It was good for both sides. Didn't have to be traded. It was a joint gain. Informal dispute resolution was faster and cheaper. Both sides liked it. You didn't have to trade for that. And getting the dangerous companies to pay more, labor liked it because it incentivized safety. And most companies, 80% of them, have very clean records for workers' comp. It's the other 20 that are dangerous. And if you treat all of them alike, safe companies pay a lot more than dangerous companies. And there are 80% of them that'd be happy to make the dangerous companies pay to incentivize better practices. What they didn't realize, well, all of those didn't have to be traded. They were good for both sides. They were shared interests. So, in addition to the conflicting interests, which was get away from that I get everything, you get nothing, you got to the complementary interests by trading across the priorities. Then you got to the shared interests by finding things that are good on both sides. If you are locked in a tug-of-war, joint gain situation, then I think as staff, you want to be able to prepare fair norms, fair standards, and fair processes. As staff, we want to, when we're faced with fighting on this scale, we want to be able to suggest fair norms, fair standards, and fair, for example, equal treatment, contribution. In other words, I spend in 80%, you put in 20%, comes time to divide the profits. It should be 80-20, not 50-50. That's contribution. Reciprocity, fair market, knowing the market's good, what are they doing in other states, what do they do in the federal government, need, those are all fair norms. Fair standards are things, external sources of information, like appraisals, new or tax value, new minus depreciation, Kelly's Blue Book, comparable sales. But in our business, it's suggestions from Brookings or some institute, it's other states, it's the federal government, it's any working model that we can bring to bear that can show a working solution. And on fair processes, mediation, arbitration, divide and choose, these are all ways to get around the problem of somebody giving in and somebody getting nothing and the other party compelling. One piece of things that I think is valuable for staff is what I call the single text process. You'd find it in Roger Fisher's book. You sit down, you listen to all parties, you write a proposal. And then instead of saying, who's with me, you say, tell me what's wrong with this. That's a very different question. When you invite criticism, you get ideas as to what is wrong, so you redraft. So you give them that proposal and they come back, oh, no, that's too much, 10's too much, or 10's too little, ought to be higher. Somebody says 15. There's a 2, it ought to be higher, blah, 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 blah. Well, that would be okay, but if it was premised on this trigger over here, that X thing, oh, and that part in the bottom, we need to cross that out, that's a bad idea. That's what you get after you do a single text procedure and you ask for criticism. But here's what you do know. That first line, it works. The third line, it works except for that number. The fourth line, it works except for that number. The fifth line, it works, and so do the same. You now have 75% of this, if we can change some other numbers, that does not have objection. That means we got 75% of a bill. So we go back in and we take these ideas and we made our changes. We redraft again, we change the numbers, we come back and we increase the acceptability, and then the chairman says, this is as good as I can do. Who's with me? Now you've had your input, now you've had your changes, now you've modeled the bill, and only then are you asking for commitment. You don't ask it for the first thing out of your mouth. You ask for criticism, and then move towards solving the criticism, and then ask for commitment. I used to do this in the banking chair. My staff member, Bill Marino, became an expert in using the single text procedure. We did it all the time, and it moved parties to improving a bill without being asked to commit to it. But as they saw the improvement of the bill, they could go back to their group and get authority so that at the end they could come to the table and say yes. Here's what I think we've discussed so far today. I think we've discussed whys before we get to how much. We need why, the question why, along with the question how much. We want our underlying interests as well as our positions. Secondly, we want to trade across differences for maximum outcomes. Third, we want to use fair process norms and be able to suggest them when they might be available, so that people believe that the system is fair. Fourth, we want to use objective criteria, information, market data, market standards that we can inject. These are the standards that would say to a third party that some party is being legitimate. This is the framework by which they would ratchet up that idea and conclude that it was reasonable or not. And lastly, I genuinely believe, and we didn't talk about this much, we want to build trust through authentic communication. And that means say what you mean and mean what you say. Be reliable. Reliability in the congruence between words and deeds is, in my estimation, the hallmark for legislative trust building. It's a pleasure to be with you. I was surrounded by staff for 28 years. I found the staff to be incredibly helpful, incredibly dedicated. And to that extent, I want to say, I appreciate and know how much talent and skill, how much trustworthiness there is in this room. And I hope my colleagues who are still there, use you to the best of your abilities because they will be well rewarded. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for spending this time together. If you get a chance, come to LMSI or something for NCSL. But if you'd like to contact me directly, my name is David Landis. I'm the Urban Development Department Director for the City of Lincoln. My email is dlandis2, that's the number 2, at unl.edu, and you can email me there. Good luck.